The girl with the sparkling eyes. In the heart of the village of Nsom, where the river sang in the moonlight and the baobab trees stood like ancient giants, there lived a young girl named Abeni. She had the brightest, most sparkling eyes, filled with dreams that never seemed to fade, even in the face of cruelty. Abeni's life was not easy. She lived in the home of Narai, the village widow, a woman as harsh as the dry season. Every day, Narai treated Abeni as a servant, forcing her to wake up before the sun, sweep the compound, fetch water from the river, and cook meals she was barely allowed to eat. Abeni had no memory of her real parents. All she knew was that Narai had taken her in when she was just a baby. But why, then, did Narai treat her like a burden? And why did she beat her so mercilessly, day after day? A life of suffering. It was still dark when Abeni's day began. The cold air wrapped around her small frame, making her shiver as she slipped out from the thin mat she used as a bed. The rooster had not even crowed yet, but she knew that if she didn't start her chores, Narai's wrath would come like a storm. With trembling hands, she picked up the old broom made from palm leaves and swept the dusty ground outside the house. The fine dust rose into the air, clinging to her skin, but she continued without complaint. By the time the first streaks of orange and pink painted the sky, she had already fetched 2 heavy pots of water from the river. Her small arms ached, her bare feet stung from stepping on sharp stones, but she dared not rest. As she entered the hut, Narai was waiting. Her eyes, dark and sharp like a hawk's, immediately found something wrong. "You lazy girl. Look at how you carry that pot. Are you trying to spill all the water? You are useless." Before Abeni could respond, a sharp slap landed on her cheek. She swallowed the pain, lowering her gaze to the ground. Speaking back would only bring more punishment. The golden bracelet. That evening, after a long day of work, Abeni sat outside under the acacia tree, watching the stars blink in the sky. She liked to imagine they were eyes of the ancestors, watching over her. But her peaceful moment was shattered when Narai's furious voice rang through the compound. "Where is my bracelet?" Abeni turned just in time to see Narai storming toward her, her face twisted in fury. "You stole my golden bracelet, didn't you?" Narai accused. Abeni's heart pounded. "No, Ma, I swear. I did not take it." But Narai was already reaching for the wooden stick she used for punishment. Pain exploded across Abeni's back. She squeezed her eyes shut, tears falling silently, but she did not beg. Begging only made Narai angrier. "You will kneel there until you confess." And so, under the cold moon, Abeni knelt, trembling, wondering how much more of this she could take. That night, she made a promise to herself. She would find the truth about her past. Because deep inside, she knew she did not belong in this house. The whispers of the river. Abeni knelt on the hard ground long after Narai had gone to bed. The pain in her back throbbed from the beating, and her knees ached from the cold, unforgiving earth. The night air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and damp soil, and the distant hoots of an owl echoed through the quiet village. She could not cry anymore. Her tears had dried up long ago. The golden bracelet was never found, but Narai did not care. To her, Abeni was guilty simply because she existed. When she was finally allowed to rise, the sky had begun to lighten with the early glow of dawn. Her body felt weak, drained, but she knew she had to fetch water from the river before anyone else woke up. She grabbed the clay pot and walked through the village, the dust cool beneath her bare feet. The air smelled fresh, the kind of scent that only came before the sun truly rose. The moonlit river was just outside the village, its water shimmering under the soft light of dawn. It was said that the river had a spirit, that it whispered to those who listened closely. Abeni knelt beside the river, dipping the clay pot into the water. The cool liquid rippled as she filled the pot, and for a moment, she allowed herself to breathe. Then, she heard it. A voice. soft, like the rustling of leaves. You are not who you think you are. Abeni's breath caught in her throat. She looked around. The riverbank was empty. Then, a shadow moved. From behind the twisted roots of an ancient baobab tree, an old woman stepped forward. Mama Nuru's warning. The woman was unlike anyone Abeni had ever seen. She was small and bent with age, her dark skin wrinkled like cracked earth. She wore a robe of deep blue, and her eyes were sharp, wise, and knowing. Abeni took a step back, gripping the clay pot. Who are you? The woman smiled. I am Mama Nuru. And you, child, are lost. Abeni frowned. I know where I am. I live in some. Mama Nuru shook her head slowly. No, child. You are lost in a different way. The river whispered behind them, and the old woman lowered her voice to a whisper. You do not belong in that house. The woman who beats you, she hides a secret. A terrible secret. Abeni's heart pounded. What do you mean? Mama Nuru gazed at her, her eyes like deep wells of knowledge. I cannot say more. Not yet. But soon, child, soon, the truth will come. She reached into the folds of her robe and pulled out a small, carved wooden pendant. Abeni gasped. The pendant was almost identical to the one Nyorai kept hidden in her hut. Mama Nuru pressed it into Abeni's palm. Keep this safe. When the time comes, you will know what to do. Then, without another word, she turned and disappeared into the trees, leaving Abeni standing there, heart racing, the whispers of the river calling around her like ghosts. The royal pendant. Abeni could not get Mama Nuru's words out of her head. She knew Nyorai had a hidden pendant, one she never let anyone see. That night, as Nyorai and Zeno slept, Abeni crept into the woman's hut. Her hands trembled as she searched through the wooden chest where Nyorai kept her belongings. Then, her fingers brushed against cold metal. She lifted it into the moonlight, a golden pendant, engraved with a royal emblem. Abeni's breath came fast. She had seen this symbol before on the banners of the king's palace, flown high during celebrations. Her head spun. Why would Nyorai have a royal pendant? Unless Abeni was not meant to be a servant girl. She was meant to be something more. And Nyorai had been hiding the truth all along. A secret hidden in shadows. Abeni held the golden pendant tightly in her hand, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it would wake the entire village. The delicate carvings of the royal emblem shimmered under the faint light of the moon. Why did Nyorai have something so precious, something that only belonged to the royal family? Abeni had always believed she was just an unwanted orphan, but now, doubt clawed at her. She had to know the truth. Clutching the pendant, she crept out of the hut, stepping as silently as a whispering breeze. The village was asleep, the only sounds coming from the distant croak of frogs and the rustling of palm trees. She knew where to go. She needed to speak to Baba Kofi, the village elder. The village elder's revelation. Baba Kofi's hut was near the village center, where the ancient fire pit always burned low through the night. Abeni found him sitting outside, smoking his long-stemmed pipe, his wise old eyes watching the stars. When he saw her approach, he raised an eyebrow. Abeni. What brings you here at this hour, child? Abeni hesitated, then slowly opened her palm, revealing the pendant. Baba Kofi's pipe nearly slipped from his lips. His aged fingers trembled as he reached for the small golden emblem, turning it over carefully. Where did you get this? He whispered, his voice suddenly tense. Abeni swallowed. From Nyorai's chest. I don't understand, Baba. Why does she have something like this? Baba Kofi exhaled deeply, his eyes misting over with memories of long ago. He looked at Abeni, really looked at her. Then, he sighed and motioned for her to sit. There is a story, child, he murmured. A story that many have forgotten, but I have not. Abeni leaned forward, her heart drumming. Baba Kofi's voice was low, almost as if he feared the night itself might be listening. 17 years ago, the great King Whale and his wife had a daughter, a baby girl. She was born with a small crescent birthmark on her shoulder. It was a sign, they said, that she was chosen by the ancestors. Abeni's breath caught in her throat. A grand festival was held in her honor, Baba Kofi continued. People came from distant lands to offer gifts to the princess. But, on that same night, tragedy struck. Abeni swallowed. What happened? Baba Kofi's eyes darkened. The baby was stolen from the palace. The crescent mark of the lost princess. Abeni's stomach twisted. Stolen? Yes, Baba Kofi said. The king searched for her for years. Every village, every town. But she was never found. He sighed. It was said that the princess was taken by someone within the palace itself. A woman, jealous of the queen. Abeni's fingers tightened around the pendant. A woman within the palace. A woman like Nerai. Her heart pounded as she felt her own shoulder, her fingers brushing against the small crescent birthmark she had always had. Her world tilted. The lost princess. Could it be? Was she? Baba Kofi suddenly reached forward, pulling Abeni's sleeve aside. His sharp intake of breath confirmed what she already knew. The birthmark. The very same one the king's daughter was said to have. Abeni's vision blurred. She was not just some orphan girl. She was the stolen princess of the kingdom. Nerai's wrath. Abeni's head spun with 1,000 emotions as she stumbled back to Nerai's hut before dawn. She had to confront her. When she pushed open the hut's wooden door, Nerai was awake, sitting on her mat, her sharp eyes narrowing as she saw Abeni. What are you doing up at this hour? She snapped. Abeni stepped forward, gripping the pendant so tightly it cut into her palm. You lied to me. Nerai's body stiffened. What nonsense are you talking about, girl? Abeni's voice shook, but she forced herself to speak. I know the truth, Nerai. I know that you stole me from the palace. For a second, Nerai's face paled. But then, her lips curled into a cruel smile. Oh, so you finally figured it out, did you? She said, her voice chillingly calm. Abeni's knees almost buckled. Why? She whispered. Why would you take me from my real parents? Nerai's smile vanished, replaced by something dark, something bitter. You want to know why? She hissed, rising to her feet. Because your mother, the queen, took everything from me. Abeni's heart hammered in her chest. She was meant to be my friend, Nerai spat. But instead, she had everything, wealth, power, beauty. And then, she had you. That was the final insult. A child born into luxury, while I, who served her day and night, had nothing. Her eyes burned with rage. So I took what she loved most, she whispered. I took you. Abeni felt like the ground had fallen away beneath her. Her entire life had been a lie. Her real parents, her true family, had been searching for her all these years, and Nerai had stolen her out of hatred. Tears blurred Abeni's vision, but something hot and fierce ignited in her chest. She would not let this woman control her any longer. You won't keep me here, she said, her voice trembling but determined. I am going to the king's festival. I will show him the truth. Nerai's face twisted with rage. You think they will believe you? Foolish girl. She roared, reaching for a wooden staff. But Abeni was faster. She dodged the blow, grabbed the golden pendant, and ran. The journey begins. Abeni burst out of the hut, her feet pounding against the dirt. Behind her, she heard Nerai screaming her name, but she did not stop. She ran through the village, past the sleeping huts, past the silent market stalls, until she reached the road that led to the king's palace. She did not know how she would get there. She did not know if they would even believe her. But she knew one thing. She had spent her entire life suffering under Nerai's cruelty. And now, she was ready to claim the life that had been stolen from her. They escaped through the forest. The night was thick with darkness, but Abeni did not stop running. Her bare feet pounded against the earth, kicking up dust as she sprinted past the village huts, past the sleeping goats, and toward the open path leading to the king's palace. Behind her, she could still hear Nerai's furious voice echoing through the night. "Abeni! You will not escape me." But Abeni did not look back. The pendant band in her palm, a reminder that she had the truth, the proof that she was not just a servant girl, but the lost princess of the kingdom. She had to reach the palace. She had to tell the king. But as she approached the edge of the village, her breath coming in ragged gasps, she heard something that made her blood run cold. The sound of footsteps. Heavy, fast footsteps. Nerai had sent men after her. The chase begins. Abeni's heart pounded. She darted into the trees, her lungs burning, her legs trembling with exhaustion. The forest was thick with vines and towering trees, their twisted branches reaching out like claws. The only light came from the silver glow of the moon, shining through the canopy above. Somewhere behind her, the men were shouting. "She ran this way. Find her. The mistress wants her back alive." Panic clawed at Abeni's throat. If they caught her, she would never be free. She forced herself to move faster, dodging thorny bushes, leaping over fallen logs. Her small frame allowed her to slip through the narrow gaps between the trees, while the larger men struggled. Still, she could hear them getting closer. Her breath came in ragged bursts, her body crying for rest. But she could not stop. She would not stop. Then, up ahead, she saw something that made her heart leap into her throat. A river. A wide, rushing river. There was no bridge, only a fallen tree trunk stretching from one side to the other. Abeni hesitated for only a moment. Then she ran toward it. Crossing the river. Her hands trembled as she grabbed onto the rough back of the fallen tree. The river roared beneath her, white foam crashing against jagged rocks. If she slipped, she would be swept away. Behind her, the men crashed through the trees. There she is. Abeni gritted her teeth. She had no choice. Taking a deep breath, she stepped onto the tree trunk, balancing carefully. 1 step. 2 steps. The wood was slick with moss, the current below pulling at the log, making it shift beneath her. Her arms flailed as she struggled to stay upright. Another step. She was halfway across when a sharp snap. The wood beneath her cracked. Abeni's eyes widened in terror as the trunk gave way, tilting violently to the side. With a scream, she leapt forward. Just as the log split apart and crashed into the river below. She landed hard on the other side, her palms scraping against the rocks. Pain flared up her arms, but she was safe. She looked back just in time to see the men skidding to a stop at the river's edge. "She's on the other side," one of them shouted. But there was no way across. The river had swallowed the tree trunk whole, leaving nothing but churning water in its place. Abeni scrambled to her feet, her heart still hammering. She had escaped. But she was not safe yet. The woman in the shadows. Abeni ran deeper into the forest, her body screaming for rest, but she did not dare stop. The palace was still far away, and she had no idea which direction to go. Branches scraped against her skin, vines tangled around her ankles. The sounds of the river faded behind her, replaced by the eerie stillness of the deep woods. Then, suddenly, a hand shot out from the darkness and grabbed her arm. Abeni screamed. She struggled, kicking and twisting to break free, but the grip was strong. Then, a voice. Quiet, child, or they will hear you. Abeni froze. The voice was familiar. Slowly, she turned her head. And there, standing in the shadows, was Mama Nuru. A hidden path. Mama Nuru's wrinkled face was calm, but her sharp eyes were filled with urgency. You are in danger, she said. Come with me. Abeni hesitated. She had no reason to trust anyone, but something in Mama Nuru's voice, something deep and knowing, made her nod. Mama Nuru led her through the trees, moving swiftly despite her old age. After several minutes of running, they came upon a narrow tunnel of twisted vines. Mama Nuru pushed them aside, revealing a hidden path. This will take you to the road that leads to the palace, she said. Abeni's breath caught. The palace. You mean? Mama Nuru nodded. I knew you would need it one day. Abeni's heart ached with gratitude. But before she could say anything, Mama Nuru pressed something cold into her hand. A second pendant. Abeni's eyes widened. It was identical to the one she had taken from Norai. She looked up at the old woman. Mama Nuru's gaze was soft, but serious. Go, child, she whispered. Go claim what was stolen from you. Abeni clutched the pendant to her chest and nodded. Then, without another word, she turned and ran down the hidden path. The road to the palace. By the time the sun began to rise, Abeni had reached the main road. Ahead, in the distance, she could see it. The king's palace. Her chest swelled with emotion. She had made it. But the hardest part was still ahead. She had to prove who she was. And she had to face the truth that her real parents had been searching for her all along. The truth unveiled. Abeni stood at the edge of the great road, her heart hammering in her chest as she gazed at the king's palace in the distance. It was larger than anything she had ever seen, its golden rooftops glinting in the morning light, its towering walls standing like sentinels over the land. For years, she had lived in misery, beaten and treated like a servant. Now, she was here, at the gates of the home she never knew was hers. She took a deep breath, clutching the golden pendant in her trembling hands. This was it. She was about to face the king. The festival of truth. The king's festival was in full swing. The palace courtyard was bustling with people, dressed in their finest robes, their laughter and chatter filling the air. Dancers moved to the rhythm of drums, their feet tapping against the polished stone ground. Merchants displayed vibrant fabrics, golden jewelry, and sweet-smelling perfumes. But the grand event was about to take place. The king himself, King Muel, was preparing to present the pendant of the lost princess, the only thing they had left of their stolen daughter. The royal guards stood at the entrance to the palace, their spears crossed as they monitored the crowd. Abeni swallowed hard. She had to get inside. A desperate plea. She stepped forward, her voice shaking. Please, she said to the guards. I must speak to the king. It is about the lost princess. One of the guards raised an eyebrow. And who are you, little girl? Abeni's hands tightened into fists. I am the princess. The guards laughed. Every year, desperate girls claim to be the lost princess, one of them scoffed. Do you have proof? Abeni lifted the pendant for them to see. The laughter died instantly. The guards stared, their expressions turning serious. Where did you get that? One demanded. Abeni stood her ground. It was stolen from me. I need to speak to the king. Please. The guards exchanged glances, then one of them nodded. Follow me. Facing the king. The grand throne room was magnificent. Golden tapestries hung from the walls, embroidered with stories of warriors and kings. At the far end of the hall, sitting upon an ornate throne, was King Muel. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man, his dark robes lined with gold. His face was wise and strong, but behind his eyes was a sorrow that had never faded. Beside him sat Queen Zola, her beauty striking, her hands clutching a small pendant identical to the one Abeni carried. Abeni's knees trembled, but she forced herself to step forward. The king's deep voice echoed through the hall. "Who are you, child?" Abeni took a deep breath, then bowed deeply. "My name is Abeni," she said. "And I believe I am your daughter." Gasps rippled through the hall. The queen's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth. King Muel's gaze darkened. "And what proof do you have of this claim?" Abeni stepped forward and lifted her sleeve. The moment her crescent-shaped birthmark was revealed, the queen gasped loudly, tears welling up in her eyes. "The mark," she whispered. Abeni's voice trembled. "I was taken from you," she said. "Raised by a woman named Nyorai. She treated me like a servant. But I always knew I was meant for more. When I found the pendant, I knew I had to come here." The king's eyes burned with emotion. The queen rose to her feet, trembling, staring at Abeni as if she were afraid to believe it was true. Then, suddenly, she rushed forward and wrapped Abeni in her arms. Tears fell from her eyes as she held Abeni tightly, as though afraid she would disappear again. "My child," she sobbed. "My baby, you have returned to me." Nyorai's lies unravel. Before Abeni could fully process what was happening, a commotion erupted at the entrance. A loud voice shouted from the palace gates. "She is lying." Abeni froze. She turned, and her heart stopped. Nyorai had arrived. She was flanked by 2 guards, her face twisted in fury, her robe stained with dust from her desperate journey. "You dare come here, spreading lies," she spat at Abeni. Gasps filled the hall as the king's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You know this girl?" he asked, his voice deadly calm. Nyorai's lips curled into a sneer. "She is nothing but a servant girl who ran away from my house," she said quickly. "She is trying to steal from the royal family." The queen's grip on Abeni tightened protectively. King Muel's gaze was like fire. "You are lying." Nyorai flinched but kept her expression defiant. "I raised that girl," she said, her voice desperate now. "I clothed her, I fed her. This is how she repays me." Abeni stepped forward. "You didn't raise me," she said, her voice strong. "You tortured me. You beat me. You tried to keep me from knowing the truth." She lifted her pendant, showing it to the king. "This was in your heart," Abeni said. "It was never yours. It was stolen from me, just like my life." Nyorai's face drained of color. She knew she had lost justice and truth. King Muel rose from his throne, his voice like thunder. "For years, I searched for my daughter," he said. "For years, I grieved her loss." His sharp eyes locked onto Nyorai. "And all this time, she was right under my nose, stolen by you." Nyorai's lips trembled, but she had no defense left. The queen, still holding Abeni, turned to the king. "She must be punished." The guard stepped forward, gripping Nyorai's arms. Abeni should have felt satisfied. But as she looked at the defeated woman, something inside her ached. Hate would not change the past. She took a deep breath. "Let her be exiled," she said softly. "Let her leave and never return." King Muel hesitated, then nodded. "So be it." Nyorai was dragged away, screaming, her fate sealed. But Abeni did not look back. She was done living in the shadows of the past. A princess returns. The celebration that followed was unlike anything Abeni had ever known. The entire kingdom rejoiced, their lost princess finally returned home. She was given fine robes, a room fit for royalty, and the love of a family she had been denied for so long. And yet, she was not the same girl she would have been if she had grown up in the palace. She had endured hardship. She had learned resilience. She had found her own strength. And she would use it to rule wisely. As she stood before the crowd, looking over the people of her kingdom, she smiled. She was home. She was where she was meant to be. A choice between revenge and mercy. The celebrations continued late into the night. The people of the kingdom danced, feasted, and rejoiced at the return of their long-lost princess. But in the grand palace, Abeni stood in silence, gazing at her reflection in the large bronze mirror. For the first time, she was dressed in royal robes, the rich fabric soft against her skin, the golden embroidery shimmering in the candlelight. She had spent her life in rags, her hands callous from endless labor. Now, she was bathed in luxury, treated with reverence. And yet, her heart was not at peace. Because in the depths of the palace dungeons, Nyorai awaited her fate. The burden of justice. King Muel had declared that Nyorai's crimes were unforgivable. She stole you from your family, he had said. She denied you a life of love and comfort. She deserves no mercy. The queen had agreed. She will face the punishment of traitors, she had said coldly. Abeni knew what that meant. Execution. The thought made her stomach turn. After everything Nyorai had done to her, the beatings, the humiliation, the cruelty, should she feel pity? She had every right to demand Nyorai's death. And yet, as she lay awake that night, staring at the canopy above her bed, she heard Mama Nuru's words in her mind. Hatred only breeds more hatred, child. The strongest hearts are those that choose mercy. Abeni closed her eyes. She had to see Nyorai one last time. A final confrontation. The next morning, Abeni made her way down the winding stone steps to the dungeons. The guards hesitated when she arrived. Are you sure, princess? One asked. She is dangerous. Abeni nodded. I must speak to her. The iron gates creaked open, and she stepped inside. There, in the dimly lit cell, sat Nyorai. She looked nothing like the powerful woman Abeni had feared for so long. Her once proud posture was broken, her robes torn and dirted. Her eyes, which had once burned with cruelty, were hollow. For the first time in her life, Abeni saw not a monster, but a broken woman. Nyorai lifted her gaze, and when she saw Abeni, her lips curled into a weak smile. So, she rasped. The little girl I raised has come to gloat. Abeni stilled herself. You did not raise me, she said softly. You stole me. Nyorai's face twitched at the words. I gave you a home, she muttered. You were nothing. I took you in. Abeni's anger flared. You did not take me in out of kindness, she said. You took me out of spite. You wanted to hurt the queen. And when you looked at me, you saw her. Silence. For a long moment, Nyorai said nothing. Then, she let out a bitter laugh. You are clever, she admitted. Clever than I ever gave you credit for. Abeni's fingers tightened into fists. She had dreamed of this moment for years. The moment when she could finally face Nyorai as an equal, without fear. But standing here, she did not feel triumph. She felt sorrow. Nyorai, she said quietly, you have lost everything. Nyorai's lips pressed together. The king will have me executed, she muttered. And you will watch, won't you? Abeni's heart ached. No, she said softly. Nyorai looked up sharply. Abeni took a deep breath. I am not like you, she said. I will not let hatred rule me. She turned toward the guard. Tell my father, she said, that I wish for her to be exiled, not executed. The guard's eyes widened. My lady, are you certain? Abeni nodded. Let her live, far away from this kingdom. She will no longer have power over me. She turned back to Narai, holding her gaze. This is not for you, she said. It is for me. For the first time, Abeni saw something in Narai's eyes that she had never seen before. Regret. Abeni did not wait for a response. She turned, stepping out of the cell, leaving Narai behind forever. A new path forward. The decision spread through the palace like wildfire. Some were shocked that Abeni had shown mercy. Others whispered that she was wise beyond her years. King Muel and Queen Zola were hesitant at first. Are you certain, my daughter? The queen asked. Abeni nodded. I do not want my first act as princess to be one of revenge, she said. She has already taken so much from me. I will not let her take my peace as well. The king studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled. You truly have a heart made for ruling, he said. Abeni's heart swelled. The next day, Narai was banished from the kingdom, sent into exile with nothing but the clothes on her back. She did not look back. And neither did Abeni. Finding her place. Days turned into weeks. Abeni worked hard to learn the ways of the palace. She was no longer a servant, but she still woke early, still carried herself with the quiet strength she had learned through hardship. She asked questions. She listened. She learned. Her parents, overcome with love, supported her every step of the way. And Zina, the girl who had once been Narai's spoiled daughter, chose to stay in the palace. I was blind for so long, Zina admitted. I let my mother's hatred shape me. But I want to be different. Abeni smiled, holding out her hand. Then let's learn together. And so, two girls who had once been raised as opposites became sisters. A queen in the making. One evening, Abeni sat on the palace balcony, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Mama Nuru's words still echoed in her mind. Hatred only breeds more hatred, child. The strongest hearts are those that choose mercy. She had chosen mercy. And in doing so, she had freed herself. As the stars twinkled above her, Abeni smiled. She was no longer a servant. She was no longer lost. She was Abeni, the rightful princess of the kingdom. And one day, she would become a queen unlike any before her. A queen who had once been broken. A queen who had chosen forgiveness over vengeance. A queen who had found her own strength. A new dawn. The golden sun rose over the kingdom, bathing the land in a warm, amber glow. The palace, once a place of sorrow and longing, now hummed with life. Abeni stood at the balcony, gazing over the city she was learning to call home. For years, she had woken to the harsh voice of Narai, the sting of a wooden cane against her skin, the weight of endless chores crushing her spirit. Now, she woke to a different world. A world where she was no longer a servant, no longer afraid. A world where she was Abeni, the princess. And one day, she would be queen. A life reclaimed. Though the celebrations had ended, Abeni's true journey had just begun. She spent her days learning the ways of the court, sitting beside her father, King Muel, as he held counsel with his advisors. She studied the laws of the land, the history of her people, and the responsibilities of a ruler. She trained with the palace guards, learning to wield a spear, to ride a horse, to defend herself. She spent hours in the village, speaking with the people, helping in the markets, remembering what it was like to be one of them. And most importantly, she never forgot who she had been. She did not let the luxury of the palace erase the girl who had survived cruelty. The girl who had fought for her truth. The girl who had chosen mercy over vengeance. The return of a friend. One afternoon, as Abeni walked through the palace gardens, she saw a familiar figure waiting by the gates. Her breath caught. It was Mama Nuru. The old woman's wise eyes twinkled as Abeni rushed forward, embracing her tightly. I knew you would find your way, Mama Nuru murmured. Abeni smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. It was because of you, she admitted. You guided me when no one else did. Mama Nuru chuckled. No, child. You had the strength in you all along. I only showed you where to look. Abeni's eyes softened. You once told me that hatred only breeds more hatred, she said. I didn't understand it before, but now I do. Mama Nuru nodded. That is why you will be a great queen one day, Abeni. Abeni's chest tightened with emotion. She had spent so long feeling powerless. Now, she understood that true strength was not in power, but in kindness. In wisdom. In forgiveness. A sister reborn. Though Abeni had been declared the true princess, Zina had also chosen to stay in the palace. At first, she had struggled with shame. Her mother had been cruel, had done terrible things. Would the people ever accept her? But Abeni did not push her away. You were raised to be like her, Abeni told her one evening as they sat on the palace steps. But you are not her. Zina had tears in her eyes. I want to be better, she whispered. Abeni reached for her hand. Then let's grow together, she said. And so, the girl who had once been her tormentor became her closest friend, her sister. Together, they walked into a new future, hand in hand. The last remnant of Nyorai. Nyorai was gone, exiled to a distant land. At first, Abeni wondered if she would ever hear from her again. Then, one day, a letter arrived. It was from a faraway village. The message was short. You were right. I have lost everything. I do not ask for forgiveness. But I will carry the weight of my choices for the rest of my days. Abeni stared at the words for a long time. And then, she let go. She did not need Nyorai's regret. She did not need an apology. She had already freed herself from her past. A future worth fighting for. Years passed. Abeni grew into a wise and just ruler, loved by the people. She never ruled from a place of cruelty. She ruled with understanding, strength, and compassion. And when the time came, she was crowned Queen Abeni, the ruler who had once been a servant, who had once been lost, but had found herself again. And so, a story of pain, of survival, of redemption, became one that was told for generations. A story that proved that even the most broken hearts can find their way home. Even those who suffer can rise again. Even those lost in darkness can step into the light. A story of a girl who had been beaten, broken, and cast aside. But who became a queen.